Greetings travellers, and welcome to Innsmouth during the festival season. As you can see, I'm on my own because Rob is far more sensible than I, and he's decided to stay well away from Innsmouth during this time. So yeah, it's not wise to be outside after dark, so follow me inside and we'll make ourselves comfortable in the back room of the bookshop. I'm your host, Tim Mendes, and today I'm going to be looking at something very near and dear to my heart. And, as I mentioned, festival, it's something that has an, admittedly tenuous link to that story. So, as you can see, I've set up my old CRT monitor, I've dug out my Pentium 90 PC, right, and I'm ready to go. I've not figured out a LAN cable yet, but I've not got anybody to do death matches with here in Innsmouth. But yes, today I'm going to be looking at a video game. More specifically, I'm going to be looking at one of my favourite video games of all time, and a video game that can instill a sense of panic with a simple sound effect. This sound effect. Now, if like me, that sound effect has you firing all of your ammunition into the nearest wall as you spin around on the spot, uttering a litany of curse words, then you will know which game I am talking about. I am talking about the absolute masterpiece that is Quake from 1996 by id Software. Before we get into that, I've just got a couple of little small itty-bitty announcements for you. Rob's recently just released his skirmish rules set game thing called We Want the Gold. My band Groovin' in Green have just released a couple of videos on YouTube. And I should remind you all about the first Smith Conference, which is taking place Saturday, January the 10th in Auburn, California, and features such luminaries as S.T. Joshi, Cody Goodfellow, Jason Bradley Thompson, Charles Schneider, Ron Hilger, and the absolute legend that is Skinner. Yeah, you can find out all of that at thesmithcircle.net. We will put links below. So yeah, back to Quake. Yeah, I think it's safe to say that Quake is one of the most beloved first-person shooters of all time. In fact, I'd probably say it was second only to its predecessor by the same company, Doom, in terms of its iconic status. Now, the reason I'm covering this absolute gem is not just nostalgia on my part, okay, that is a bit of the fact, but it is inspired by the works of H.P. Lovecraft. It also has incredibly strong ties to the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game. So yes, we're going to get into all that in due course. Yeah, some people might have been expecting something a bit more festive, but there is some kind of weird twisted logic behind me covering this. Now, Christmas is not my favourite time of the year. I'm one of these people who tends to hide away from it as much as possible. So something that's become a bit of a treat for me over the years is Night Dive Studios tend to do a big remaster of a classic 90s first-person shooter, and there's usually one out this time of year. And this year it's Blood, which was by Monolith Productions and is absolutely great. It's a horror-themed first-person shooter. If you're not familiar with it, go check it out. It's so much fun. But a few years ago, Night Dive released the remaster of Quake, and I absolutely adore it, as I mentioned. Now, I recently clocked the remaster that they also did of Quake 2. I say recently clocked, I clocked them again. All of Night Dive's remasters tend to come bundled with new episodes featuring new levels and that kind of thing. So, and these are no exception. Now, Quake 2 doesn't have any connection to the original Quake. We will get into that. At least it didn't. Now, thanks to the work of Machine Games, who did the new expansion, it does. It's tied in now, which is nice, because it's something that's always bugged me. So, before we get into the game itself, we're going to do a little bit of background on id Software. id Software's founders, John Carmack, John Romero, and Tom Hall, were working together at Softdisk, which was a development company based in Shreveport, Louisiana, where they developed multiple games for a monthly publication. Basically, they made, you know, them games that you used to get on the front of magazines on a floppy disk, or before that on a cassette. Yes, well, they were one of the developers who did that. Now, within Softdisk, they'd made their own little group, which Ramiro had dubbed Ideas from the Deep. So they were sort of a group within a group already. Now, in September 1990, John Carmack, who was an incredibly talented programmer, came up with a way to actually do a rapidly side-scrolling game on a PC. Now, so that was something that people couldn't do before that. That was why consoles such as the NES and the Sega Master System and all that kind of stuff were so revolutionary, because, yeah, you basically on a PC, you were stuck with a static screen most of the time if you were playing like a platforming game, that kind of business. So when he'd cracked this lovely little engine that he made, him and Hall stayed up all night making a replica of the first level of Super Mario Bros. 3. Now, they inserted stock graphics of John Ramiro's Dangerous Dave character in basically in place of Mario, and called it Dangerous Dave in copyright infringement. So Ramiro was over the moon when he came in. He was like, oh, this is amazing, that kind of business. So, seeing the potential, they moonlighted over a week and 2 weekends to make a full demo of a PC version of Super Mario Bros. 3. They sent it to Nintendo, and Nintendo basically told them to stop it. Just behave yourself. So, due to this and the popularity of the Dangerous Dave games, Scott Miller of Apogee contacted them and basically got them, and was basically like, look, can you do something like this? Can you do as a side-scrolling game that isn't, going to get us sued by Nintendo? So they did. They came up with Commander Keen, which was a side-scrolling game incorporating some of the previous work that they'd done on that demo. The first game, Commander Keen in Invasion of the Vorticans, was released in December 1990 and was incredibly successful on the shareware model. After their first royalty check, Ramiro, Carmack, and Adrian Carmack, who was an artist that had just started working with them, decided to start their own company and hired Hall to join in with them. So they finished off the Commander Keen series, then hired 2 other people and began working on something that would basically crack the ceiling for them. But before we get to Wolfenstein 3D, because that was their big breakthrough, okay, before they got to that, Carmack was making a proper 3D engine. And the first game he made on this engine was a little-known game called Hover Tank 3D. And it was set during a nuclear war. You basically control a mercenary in a tank kind of thing. It's all done from the first person. And you go round a maze, you zap things, and rescue hostages. Basically, these mutated humans, strange creatures, and enemy hover tanks, that kind of stuff. It was very, very basic. It was basically a load of blocks. It wasn't a million miles away from the old Spectrum 3D monster maze, but except that it was buttery smooth for the time, which was something that, it blew people's minds. After that, they went on to work on Catacomb 3D, which included texture mapping, so they could make the walls more interesting. They were essentially just coloured blocks and rectangles in Hover Tank 3D. But in Catacomb 3D, it looked like you were in a catacomb. You play a wizard, you go around, you throw fireballs at ogres. It's kind of cool. I actually really enjoy Catacomb 3D. I think it's an absolutely great game, and it's another game that is well worth a remaster. So if you're listening, Night Dive, get on it. Anyway, after that, Wolfenstein 3D. A game that needs very little introduction from me. It was widely regarded as the first proper first-person shooter. It was the first time you saw the gun being held in the hand at the bottom of the screen, and you essentially seeing through the eyes of the character. Okay, they'd done it in Catacomb as well, but that had more sort of dungeon crawl elements to it, whereas this was just a run and gun. You zip around the corridors of a castle blasting Nazis. I mean, what's not to like? I mean, there you go. It's quite rightly heralded as a landmark in game design. From there, they went on to create Doom, which, again, needs no introduction. It is rightfully heralded as, watershed. It's a great game. Basically, you're a space marine. You're working on Mars, demons, boom, essentially. Now, during the making of Doom, Tom Hall quit. He liked the kiddie-friendly stuff like Commander Keen, and to a degree, Catacomb. He didn't like the gritty direction they were going in with Wolfenstein, and he definitely didn't like the direction they were going in with Doom. So as a replacement for Tom Hall, id Software hired a new level designer by the name of Sandy Peterson. Now, a lot of you, I realise, their ears will have pricked up on hearing that name. Yes, Carl Sanford Jocelyn Peterson, Sandy Peterson for short, is an American game designer who worked at Chaosium. There we go. Sandy Peterson was the principal author of Chaosium's Call of Cthulhu, published in 1981, and wrote many of the scenarios and background pieces thereafter. One of the things that he wrote is something that we will come back to very shortly, which is Sandy Peterson's Book of Monsters. After leaving id Software, Sandy Peterson went on to creating Cthulhu Wars, Orcs Must Die, Evil High Priest, The Gods of War, Hyperspace, Planet Apocalypse. He also worked on the Age of Empires games as well, which is something I didn't realise until recently, but yes, he did. He worked on Age of Empires 2 and 3, and all the expansions thereof. He also worked on Halo Wars, which, that did not know that either. So there you go, you learn something new every day, don't you? Now, outside of level design, Sandy Peterson's influence on Doom was fairly limited, like all the assets were in place by the time he was brought on board. In 2023, Sandy Peterson did an interview with the Surreal and Creepy blog, talking about his time working on these games, amongst other things. It's quite an interesting read. I'll put your links in the show notes. Talking about Doom, he said, "The Doom engine and backstory was mostly done when I joined the team, so I didn't really get a chance to affect it, but I was in on Quake from the start. The existence of Shamblers, Formless Spawn, and Shub-Niggurath speaks for itself." Oh, it certainly does. So, yes, we're going to move on to Quake now, because that is the meat and potatoes of this very episode. And I was blown away by this game. I got the shareware, basically got the first episode. I think it came on the front of a magazine, like PC format or something like that. And I remember playing it, and I was absolutely blown away by it, to the point that I actually took the day off on the day of release so I could go to the Virgin Megastore in Manchester and get myself a copy. That's how hyped I was. I think it was the Virgin Megastore. It was one of them shops, the shops that you don't exist anymore on the high street. But I was blown away by it, just the atmosphere of it, and obviously the Lovecraft of it just was instantly recognisable to me. So basically what I'm going to be doing today is looking at all of the Lovecraftian elements of this game, while also talking about the people who made it and all that kind of stuff. Now, Quake started out as a very different beast. It started out more as a harking back to Catacomb 3D, really. Basically, id Software were huge Dungeons & Dragons players. So John Romero, specifically, wanted to make a game. It was incredibly ambitious. They wanted, character classes and magic and all this kind of stuff. Something, I guess, akin to, what would become Ultimate Underworld and that kind of business. But, they really struggled. The making of the game Quake was somewhat fraught. John Romero explained that in the beginning there were ideas of abstract environments, medieval type stuff, but there wasn't any written down design for Quake during its first year. So by November the team was really burned out trying to make a game that really didn't have an identity. They were making a lot of levels but having to delete them and start over because the engine was getting better. But when we got to the end of November, the engine was ready, so now we could actually design a game around it. So when the tech was finally completed, and this was an absolutely masterwork of Carmack's, this was the first fully 3D game engine used in a first-person shooter. Until then, while they'd been called 3D, they were 2.5D, because while the environments would be pretty much 3D, all the sprites were 2D. It was 2D sprites. So if you think of things like Duke Nukem and all that kind of stuff, and the build engine games, which of Blood I mentioned earlier, that's another one. The sprites in that were 2D sprites. This was the first time you had fully 3D monsters. So yeah, it was a giant leap, and it looked absolutely gorgeous. It still looks tremendous to this day, if you ask me. Unfortunately, by this time, the team was just like at an end. Ramiro went on to explain, "We had a big company meeting to decide whether we were going to slap Doom-style weapons in and make it a classic FPS, or experiment with some new game design ideas. Some people in the team just said, you know what, I'm broken, I can't do it anymore." They wanted just to throw Doom-style weapons in and call it a day. I mean, obviously we were going to make them as good as we could, but we weren't going to be pushing game design in any new direction. So when that decision was made, I basically decided that I was going to be leaving when the game was over, which is a real shame. Ramiro did leave after the completion of Quake and went on to create a game that became a bit of a joke in the industry, Daikatana. But controversially, I'm one of the few people who actually like it. I think it's flawed, it's full of bugs, it's an absolute nightmare, it's a broken mess, but there's something about it that I just really enjoyed. Again, because Ramiro's name was on it, I went out and bought it on the day of release. Okay, it didn't work on the day of release, and I had to wait for a floppy disk with a patch on it. But yeah, yeah. Oh, memories. Ramiro went on to explain how it came about that it went with the Lovecraftian element. As I said, they were all into D&D, but when Sandy Peterson came on board, he basically got John Ramiro into it. Ramiro explains, "Sandy Peterson was a huge H.P. Lovecraft fan. I'd heard his name, but I thought he was just a classic writer, and Sandy basically said, 'Oh, no,' and gave me all these Chaosium books that he'd written. When I read them, I was mind destroyed. I was just blown away by the monsters, so Quake was very inspired by H.P. Lovecraft, as I'd just been exposed to him." Back on the Surreal and Creepy blog, Sandy Peterson said, "Well, obviously there are heaps of Lovecraft bits in the games. Basically my idea was to give players a creepy, scary world to crawl around in, and then when a monster appeared in a kind of jump scare, the player would be freaked out, I hoped. I showed the artists some of my books from the Chaosium days with cool horror art which influenced monster production, particularly in Quake." Peterson talked about the development, saying, "The original concept of Quake was that it was going to be an RPG type game in which you played a dude named Quake and a fantasy D&D world was bleeding into our own. Quake was a character from John Carmack's old D&D campaign, a hero who had a magical hammer that when it hit the ground made it quake, and who had an orbiting magic spiky ball that intercepted attacks and killed things it hit. The first monsters we did were ogres, which carried bags of grenades. That was supposed to represent the crossover. Then the knights, a medieval touch. But the other part was that John Ramiro was supposed to design the backstory and plot, which never happened. Instead, we just turned it into another sort of Doom with demons and cool layouts. The Magic Quake's hammer special effect got used in the lightning gun though. Also, we, the level designers, figured out how to scale up objects, so American McGee made a 100-foot high zombie and built a whole level around it. It was super awesome. I then went and made a super giant vor which shot giant spike balls. Then the artists rained on our parade and said we couldn't do them because when we scaled up the monsters, we also scaled up the textures, which looked terrible. So boo-hoo." That's a shame. Hey, Mr. Peterson, go back and do it now. You could do it now. That would be absolutely brilliant. So yeah, it's all quite interesting insight. But despite all these problems, Quake did indeed get made. So, without further ado, I'm going to turn myself to what little there is of the story. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to read you a bit from the official manual that came bundled with the game back in the day. I still have this, which is a miracle. I've lost pretty much most things over the years, but I still have my original CD copy of Quake, and I still have the manual that came with it. So here we go. This is the story of Quake. Background. You get the phone call at 4 AM. By 5:30, you're in the secret installation. The commander explains tersely. It's about the Slipgate device. Once we perfect these, we'll be able to use them to transport people and cargo from one place to another instantly. An enemy codenamed Quake is using its own slipgates to insert death squads inside our bases to kill, steal and kidnap. The hell of it is we have no idea where it's from. Our top scientists think Quake not from Earth, but another dimension. They say Quake's preparing to unleash its real army, whatever that is. You're our best man. This is Operation Counter-Strike, and you're in charge. Find Quake and stop him, or it. You have full authority to requisition anything you need. If the eggheads are right, all our lives are expendable. Prelude to Destruction. While scouting the neighbourhood, you hear shots back at the base. Damn, that Quake bastard works fast. You heard about Operation Counter-Strike and hit first. Racing back, you see the place is overrun. You're almost certainly the only survivor. Operation Counter-Strike is over, except for you. You know that the heart of the installation holds a slipgate. Since Quake's killers came through, it is still set to his dimension. You can use it to get loose in his hometown. Maybe you can get to the asshole personally. You pump around into your shotgun and get moving. All you need to know. So the game opens with you choose which difficulty you want to play off, and you are set down into a hall and you've got 4 doorways. So Quake is divvied up into 4 episodes. Each of these episodes consists of 8 levels, or maps as they're known in the game, one of which is a hidden map. And one of those hidden ones is one of my favourites, Ziggurat Vertigo. It's got it's got low gravity and it's an absolute joy to throw grenades around. It's so much fun. Anyway, I digress. These episodes are called Dimension of the Doomed, The Realm of Black Magic, The Netherworld, and The Elder World. Each one starts off in a military complex, not that dissimilar from Doom. You fight your way through. Basically, most of the enemies in that are sort of possessed soldiers and corrupted Rottweilers and that kind of thing. So yeah, shotgun to the face time. When you reach the end of these maps, you find the Slipgate. You enter the Slipgate and you end up in one of the dimensions. So the story is imparted on end of episode screens. Again, there's not a hell of a lot of story. You don't need a lot of story in a first-person shooter. Well, not this kind of shooter anyway. So, I'm going to read you these because they just fill in so much of the blanks of the Lovecraftian, and your ears will prick up at various points. So, after the Dimension of the Doomed, this is what you learn. As the corpse of the monstrous entity Chthon sinks back into lava whence it rose, you grip the rune of earth magic tightly. Now that you have conquered the Dimension of the Doomed, realm of earth magic, you are ready to complete your task. A rune of magic power lies at the end of each haunted land of Quake. Go forth, seek the totality of the 4 runes. First off, you will have picked up on Chthon, but we'll get onto that in a bit when we talk about the bestiary. Now, something that I noticed here is that the rune of earth magic, this is sort of elemental in a way. So I do wonder if a bit of the Derlethian has slipped into this. But whatever, it's good stuff. So it's a simple but effective plot. Invading monsters, you've got to go to their homelands to basically get these runes and close whatever rift and whatever. Get the girl, kill the baddies, save the entire planet, right? There we go. The second episode, entitled The Realm of Black Magic, ends thus. The rune of black magic throbs evilly in your hand and whispers dark thoughts into your brain. You learn the inmost lore of the Hell Mother, Shub-Niggurath. You now know that she is behind all the terrible plotting which has led to so much death and horror. But she is not inviolate. Armed with this rune, you realise that once all 4 runes are combined, the gate to Shub-Niggurath's pit will open and you can face the witch goddess herself in her frightful otherworld cathedral. So there we go. Penny drop, eh? The entity codename Quake is actually Shub-Niggurath. Yes, great stuff, absolutely great stuff. And we will talk at length about the pit level, because oh my god, that had me stumped for days and days and days, maybe even weeks, you know. But it's basically one of those that's kind of a combat puzzle. But yeah, we'll get on to that. The next episode is entitled The Netherworld. The charred viscera of diabolic horrors bubble viciously as you seize the rune of hell magic. Its heat scorches your hand, and its terrible secrets blight your mind. Gathering the shreds of your courage, you shake the devil's shackles from your soul, and become ever more hard and determined to destroy the hideous creatures whose mere existence threatens the souls and psyches of all the population of Earth. You can tell they were D&D fans, can't you? Because this is proper Dungeon Master stuff, right? I mean, this is Dungeon Master 101. You know, you could just picture them sitting around a table and him saying this while they're rolling, you know, doing their spot trap roll or something, you know what I mean? Okay, the final episode, in which all the maps in this episode were designed by Sandy Peterson, is called The Elder World. Despite the awful might of the Elder World, you have achieved the rune of Elder Magic, capstone of all types of arcane wisdom. Beyond good and evil, beyond life and death, the rune postulates, heavy. The rune pulsates, heavy with import, patient and potent. The elder being Shub-Niggurath weaves her dire plans to clear off all life from Earth and bring her own foul offspring to our world. For all the dwellers in these nightmare dimensions are her descendants. Once all runes of magic power are united, the energy behind them will blast open the gateway to Shub-Niggurath, and you can travel there to foil the Hell Mother's plots in person. Now you have all 4 runes. You sense tremendous invisible forces moving to unseal ancient barriers. Shub-Niggurath had hoped to use the runes herself to clear off the Earth, but now instead you will use them to enter her home and confront her as an avatar of avenging Earth life. If you defeat her, you will be remembered forever as the saviour of the planet. If she conquers, it will be as if you had never been born. Dun dun dun! So yeah, you end up in Shub-Niggurath's pit, which is the final level of the base game. And if you eventually, in my case, it took a while, get through it, you are greeted by this. This is the final piece of the game's narrative. Congratulations and well done. You have beaten the hideous Shub-Niggurath and her hundreds of ugly changelings and monsters. You have proven that your skill and your cunning are greater than all the powers of Quake. You are the master now. id Software salutes you. There you go. Like I say, you can see the D&D influence on the plot, and you can also see the Sandy Peterson influence. I mean, so onto the game itself. I mentioned that the first parts of each episode start off in these military installations with sort of corrupted humanoids and corrupted dogs, that kind of giant piranhas, that kind of thing, right? So, knowing what we know about the creation of this game, when you get into these worlds, it is a bit of a strange hodgepodge, because the first creatures you come up against are pretty much D&D fantasy creatures. You've got zombies, right, which are just a standard fodder. Ogres with grenades, they stayed in. If you squint, you could say they were a ghoul, right? I mean, that's what I do. I squint and say that they're roided up ghouls, these ogres. You know, that's how I sort of reconcile it. But then you get knights. They're zombie knights. It's two different types of. One is sort of your standard knighty knight type, and then you've got your death knight, which is a big fella with a massive sword that shoots like spikes at you and things like that. It's once you move past then that we get into the interesting creatures. The first truly Lovecraftian creature you will meet in Quake in this game is called a fiend. But the fiend is actually based on a creature from Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath, the Ghast. In the manual, the fiend is described as an organic buzzsaw rife with pummeling power. And it's kind of an ape-like being that jumps out of nowhere and attacks you. Basically, big old claws, glowing yellow eyes, sort of pinkish skin. They tend to be sort of tucked away around corners a lot, or hidden behind trap walls. They're the sort of one that gives you a jump scare a lot of the time, are these little fellas. What is of interest is the fact in the story, The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath, the Ghasts dwell in the Vaults of Zin. The Vaults of Zin is one of the levels in Quake. There we go. You see, yeah, it doesn't just stop to creature design. We'll get to a few more of the levels later on. But yeah, the Vaults of Zin is one of the levels, and fiends, or ghasts, sort of lurk around there quite a lot. In Dream Quest, Lovecraft writes, "The ghasts, those repulsive beings which die in the light, and which live in the Vaults of Zin, and leap on long hind legs like kangaroos." After a moment, something about the size of a small horse hopped out into the grey twilight, and Carter turned sick at the aspect of that scabrous and unwholesome beast, whose face is so curiously human despite the absence of a nose, a forehead, and other important particulars. In the game, they do indeed leap on their hind legs and slash at you with their claws. The only way they sort of divert from Lovecraft's description is id Software have added horns to their heads to make them more menacing looking. But apart from that, they're essentially a ghast. Next up, we have a creature which isn't actually directly based on anything in Lovecraft's work, but is just a very Lovecraftian creature that I think that they just sort of went, oh, well, that'd be cool. It's essentially a three-legged sort of spider-like creature with a humanoid body that shoots these spiky projectiles at you. And it's known as a Vor in the game. It is also known as a Shalrath. So, yeah, Vor or Shalrath. In the manual, they are described as a spider-esque hybrid horror. And yeah, that kind of sums them up. They're actually introduced as a boss monster of sorts at the end of the second episode. They're incredibly tough. If you get more than one of these in a room, you are kind of screwed. You have to be very, very nimble, because their projectile that they shoot at you is a homing projectile. The best thing to do is sort of kite around and get other creatures in the way, and cause a bit of infighting. Like I say, not directly based on anything in Lovecraft. I'm not anything I'm aware of, but an incredibly Lovecraftian creature anyway. Another creature which kind of acts as a boss monster is the Shambler. Oh, a good old-fashioned dimensional Shambler. In the manual, it's described as, "Even other monsters fear him, so expect a clobbering. He shrugs off explosives. Good luck." Yeah, giant, a great big monster with clawed hands, sort of. It's been debated whether they have fur or not. Some people say it's an energy, it's sort of like electricity, things like that, but they look like they're furry. They kind of look like yetis, but with their head is just basically a giant toothy maw. They're great, great creatures. Now, in the works of H.P. Lovecraft, a dimensional Shambler is a race of monsters from a different dimension that first appeared in the story The Horror in the Museum. There is some speculation that they are the same creature described in Clark Ashton Smith's story The Hunters from Beyond. You see, Smith's story came first, and it is believed that Lovecraft got the idea from The Hunters from Beyond. So that's quite an interesting little bit of tidbit there. They kind of act a little bit like the Hounds of Tindalos. They walk between the planes and worlds, never spending much time in each area, that kind of thing. In The Horror in the Museum, a dimensional Shambler is described as black in coloration, resembling something half ape, half insect, which is different from Clark Ashton Smith's, in which they are pale grey and look more canine-like in appearance, although they've also been compared to apes. Now in Quake, like I say, they're more kind of Yeti-like, which again would actually indicate a bit of Derlethian influence. They're almost Ithaca-esque, if that's even a word. Well, it is now. Here's a nice little excerpt from The Horror in the Museum. Shuffling towards him in the darkness was the gigantic, blasphemous form of a thing not wholly ape, not wholly insect. Its hide hung loosely upon its frame, and its rugose, dead-eyed rudiment of a head swayed drunkenly from side to side. Its 4 paws were extended, with talons spread wide, and its whole body was taut with murderous malignity, despite its utter lack of facial description. Nice. So there we go. Next up, it's time. We have to talk about that noise. The only thing worse than that noise in Quake is this noise. I'm sure I've probably given long-time players a few nightmares there. The first noise means that you have been spotted by arguably the game's most irritating monster. It's both irritating and deadly. And it's irritating by the fact that it moves so damn quick and is so hard to hit. And it is called the Formless Spawn of Sarthogua. Or Spawn, for short. There we go. Yes, long-time listeners to the podcast will need no introduction to Formless Spawn, especially if you also listen to Strange Shadows. Just cast your mind back to the story The Tale of Satampra Zeros by Clark Ashton Smith, and you will be introduced to the Formless Spawn of Sarthogua in all their glory. Now, in the manual, a spawn is called a merrily bouncing blob, as dangerous to kill as to ignore. Yeah, because the problem is, that noise, the second noise, the squelchy noise, is when they're squelching around the place and they squelch right in your face. Now, if you happen to shoot them, they explode and you get damage. Now, later on, in one of Sandy Peterson's most fiendish levels, you go into this room and there's about 6 of the damn things. The best way is to sort of hide above. There's a little lift and sort of chuck grenades down and hope for the best. Oh, Spawn. Oh, absolutely terrible creatures. I love them. They look great as well. They are what you'd imagine. They're kind of like a little blue Shoggothi thing that sort of bounces about. Yeah, Formless Spawn of Sarthogua. It doesn't get any more explicit than that, does it, when it comes to a mythos reference? At the top of the show, I mentioned Festival, being as Festival season is upon us. So here is my tenuous tie-in to the festive season. The next creature we're looking at, it goes by the name in the game of a scrag, and is described in the manual as floats like a butterfly, stings like a bee, ugly as hell. These little flying terrors kind of resemble a white cobra combined with a human torso, and they like to spit small yellowish green globs of poison at you. Yeah, they're interesting creatures, but they are inspired by the creatures in the festival. So yeah, those flying creatures, we've often discussed what those flying creatures are. I think the general consensus is that they are Biakis. So that's good enough for me. Also known as a scrag. So there we go. A scrag is a Biaki, according to basic what you can work out. They were inspired by the creatures in the festival, and if the creatures in the festival are Biaki, then they're Biaki. That works enough for me. Now, moving on to the 2 proper boss monsters. The first one is Chthon, which is basically rising from the lava. You get this humanoid creature with a split face. It's basically just a split maw. Now, Chthon is based on the Chthonians from the works of Brian Lumley, but the facial aspect of it is believed to be inspired by a Gug. Yeah, he's one of those because he's a boss thing. You can't just pump bullets into it. Again, it's an environmental puzzle. You have to run round and bring down these pillars and electrocute it. So yeah, in Quake he's depicted as an infernal red monster, with basically with the vertical mouth of a Gug. So it's interesting because yeah, it's basically Brian Lumley creation filtered through H.P. Lovecraft. But there you go. It's a great little character. Yeah, another one that had me stumped for a while, but not as much as the final battle. Old Shubby herself. So you're in this room, you end up in Shubby's pit, and Shubby's in the centre of it, surrounded by like slime that damages you if you walk in it. And round the outside is like a big old walkway, and you go up it and monsters keep spawning, but at the end of it there's a teleporter. Now you jump through the teleporter and you end up on Shubby's island, or you can end up in the slime, or you can just end up somewhere else. What I didn't realise for ages is that there's a little, it's almost like one of the Vor's projectiles floating about the place. Because one of the mechanics in the game, which is used in death matches, is telefragging. So if you use a teleporter and somebody else is on where you're about to teleport in, they get fragged, they die, right? So that's the only way to kill Shubby. And it took me ages to work this out. I'm really ashamed by how long it took me to work this out. Basically, Shubby in the game uses the depiction used by Robert Bloch in a notebook found in a deserted house for what we believe is one of the Dark Young. Something black in the road, something that wasn't a tree, something big and black and ropey, just squatting there, waiting with ropey arms squirming and reaching. Yeah, so it was basically using the depiction of a Dark Young used in Call of Cthulhu role-playing game, specifically from the Sandy Peterson book of monsters. So, yeah, there we go. Like I say, Shub-Niggurath's Pit is the final level of the game, and we've already mentioned the Vaults of Zin. So I think it's time now we should mention some of the other levels, because again, they're taken directly from Lovecraft stories. We have the Nameless City, which, probably needs no introduction. Got the Elder God Shrine and all that business. My favourite is not actually part of the base game. It was a user-created level. It was created by Steve Rezko, and it's called The Shadow over Innsmouth. And Rezko actually recreates the town of Innsmouth in the Quake engine. I love it. I got it on the front of a magazine. It was it was called Quake Zone or something. It was given away with one of the mags at the time, and I wish I knew where that CD was. I've still got it somewhere. But oh my god, it was such a great episode. There's lots of other user created maps as well. Yeah, pretty much the game is a strange hodgepodge of sort of medieval Dungeons and Dragons-y thing and the cosmic horror of H.P. Lovecraft. So in a way, it is kind of almost Robert E. Howard-like in a way. But whatever the case, it's an absolutely brilliant game, and if you haven't played it yet, you should go and pick up the Night Dive remaster, because it comes with both expansion packs and 2 brand new episodes. That brings me back to what started like this conversation was in Quake 2, because like I say, the second game has pretty much nothing to do with this, or at least it didn't. It does now. In that you're fighting an alien race called the Strogue, and it goes down the proper sort of Space Marine kind of route, right? You're in space, you're shooting a lot of alien things, sort of cyborgs and all that kind of good stuff. It's a tremendous game, and was another great leap in technology in terms of game engine and that kind of stuff. But what is a real welcome addition in the remaster that they did of Quake 2, in the new expansion called like Dimension of the Machine or something like that. No, Dimension of the Machine was the Quake one, wasn't it? I can't remember what it was called off the top of my head. But it's in the final bit, you end up going in a portal and you end up in one of Quake's dimensions with the Shambler and stuff. So it ties it all up nicely, that it's all part of the same universe, and that it sort of implies, in the way I've seen it, that Quake 2 and Quake 4 and all that are kind of prequels to Quake, because the slipgate technology, because they don't have that technology in Quake 2, but at the end, when you end up in the Strogue sort of stuff, you get it, right? So that's very exciting. So essentially, it makes, them a prequel in a way. That's how I read it anyway. Okay, just before we Just before I wrap this up, one last thing I'd like to talk about very quickly is the sound and music design, because it is second to none. I still think it's the best sound and music design in a video game ever, because it was actually done by Trent Reznor of Nine Inch Nails. He did all the sound effects and the score. Oh my word. I still listen to the soundtrack album to this day. It's absolutely banging stuff. And it just adds to it, because up until that point you had your sort of MIDI, kind of stuff in Doom and all that, right? So this was one of the first times you actually had proper recorded music on a soundtrack. One of the other ones was Descent, which was another first-person game, and the music in that was done by Ogre from Skinny Puppy. So there was something about industrial artists doing the soundtrack to video games. In fact, it was one of the guys from Frontline Assembly, Bill Lieb, did the music for Quake 3. So, yeah, absolutely good stuff. So that sound effect of the spawn, the attacking spawn, you can thank Trent Reznor for that. Well, I hope you've enjoyed my little dive into one of my favourite games. It's a little bit self-indulgent, this, but I hope you've enjoyed it. It's been quite interesting looking at the inspiration behind the monsters and things like that, because some of them it's not explicit to begin with, like, the Scrag or the Fiend. It's only when you do a little bit of digging and look at the source code as well, because it's like the Formless Spawn of Sarthogua is the source code. That's what it's called. And things like that. So you figure out what is, so you can figure it out from that kind of thing. One thing I nearly forgot. A glaring thing is a power-up, the pentagram of protection. It's the Necronomicon symbol. Oh, I can't believe I nearly forgot that. Yeah. Oh dear. Yeah, it's not your straight pentagram. It's the old Necronomicon one. Right, so I hope you're having a very good festive season and you haven't been carried off by a Biaki or anything like that. And we will see you again when normal service resumes in the new year. So with that, it is goodbye from me, Tim Mendes.